Good morning. There's a fellow I met some years ago. I was preparing for an Anzac Day celebration and service, and I wanted to meet some more servicemen and women to hear kind of what they're able to speak to me about their experiences of war and fighting and being in the army and what Anzac Day meant for them. And so I'd heard of this fellow and suggested I contact him. And so I made contact and went around, and over a cup of tea, he shared something of his story, what he was able, the horrors of warfare, of being in the trenches, hell on earth. He said, do anything you can to avoid war. It's awful. We fought so that others wouldn't have to fight. Do whatever you can to stop war. It was passionate, but kind of this sad helplessness of what he experienced. As the conversation continued, his demeanour changed. The passion was there, but it became much more strident and forceful as he began to talk about further experiences. In the army regiment or group he was in, he and several of his colleagues were restricted how high they could rise through the ranks because they were Protestants and the leadership were Catholics in this part, and they favoured their own. He went on and spoke more about this in growing up in a part of the hunter, and different industries, different careers had either Protestant or Catholic dominated leadership. His just happened to be Catholic. And again, as a Protestant, he was stopped from rising up through those ranks and being promoted. He felt discrimination and injustice, and he hated the Catholics. I'd heard a story earlier about him. He was a member of a congregation, a church, he and his wife and his children when they were younger. They'd been part of this church for a long time. They were quite established members and engaged members. One morning, the minister at the time pulled out a crucifix, a cross with Jesus on it, the crucified Jesus on this cross. And he showed it to the congregation towards the end of his sermon. And this guy saw it. It's usually used in Catholic churches. In the Protestant church, it's more just the empty cross. And he saw this Catholic cross as he understood it. And he gave him a few minutes, and I think at the end of the sermon, he just stormed out of the church and never set foot in the church again. So incensed was he that he'd bring this Catholic thing, And he talked about that. And his demeanour was, his mind was set on being a Protestant and being anti-Catholic. And I think in the army or in the workforce, if the tables had been turned and the leadership had been Protestant, favouring him and his colleagues, him and his mates, over the Catholics, he wouldn't have minded one bit, because Protestants were right and Catholics were wrong. It was that kind of intensity. It had nothing to do with religion or faith. It's about culture. It was about where you sat, ideology, culture, history, all sorts of other things that they brought to the table. But once the mind was made up and the face was set on a direction, on an ideology, on a faith system or whatever it was, everything else was discarded. And when you met the other, there was resistance, anger, hatred, prejudice, fighting, violence. Sometimes in some parts of the world, it is physical violence. There's bombs and guns and stuff. We think of Northern Ireland. His wasn't a physical violence, but it was the violence of rhetoric, but also the violence of discrimination, exclusion, of pushing people away, ignoring them, avoiding them, and speaking out against them. This is common in our world. When we set our face, our mind on a particular course, again, ideology, politics, vision, it can be for good or evil. and it can be used as a weapon against people. And we think of Donald Trump, who has a particular mindset and a particular vision, ideology, whatever. And if you're an immigrant or a refugee who he perceives are taking American jobs and homes and whatever else, he'll kick you out. You're out. Even workers from overseas that bring their skills and expertise are under threat because he perceives them as threatening Americans. If you're different in some way, Donald Trump may hate you and despise you and want you gone. It's what we see in the Ukraine and Russia, that Vladimir Putin has his mind set on this renaissance of empire, of a Russian empire. And he believes that the Ukraine belongs to Russia. And there's other countries as well, nations. And he is trying to build his empire, reignite this empire from long ago. Benjamin Netanyahu has got his mind set on this land is ours. And anyone else who is here that is not Jewish needs to go. And they're sitting in the tanks and the tractors and bulldozers and destroying homes and livelihoods of Palestinians who have been there for centuries. As well as the bombs that are coming in to blow up hospitals and universities and schools. And there's all these narratives around justifying how we hate other people and how we use violence towards them. But sometimes when people set their mind on something, it's for good. Rosa Parks, who determined not to stand up in a bus to give her seat to a white person simply because she was black. She was tired and she said, "I'm not getting up." And that created a crisis, riots and protests. And Martin Luther King Jr. was pushed to be the figurehead, to lead this civil rights movement. His mind was set, his face was set on this reign of God as he saw it, of justice, of peace, of bringing people together based not on the colour of their skin, but the quality of their character. For him, it was to resist the evil in the world that discriminated and hurt and destroyed, and to give life. But it wasn't about destroying the enemy, it was about loving the enemy and resisting the evil they did. And so it was resisting in a non-violent way. And I see something of this, well, not something, I see a lot of this in Jesus. And the story this week from Luke's story is of Jesus whose face is set on Jerusalem, who has changed tack and is now heading towards Jerusalem, the holy city where he will be killed. His mind is set on going to fulfill what must happen, to reveal in his life, in his being, this grace, this love, this reign of God that will be encountered through death and resurrection. And as he goes and as he journeys with his disciples, they pass through the land of the Samaritan people, which traditionally or in the ancient world was the northern kingdom of Israel, who were overrun by the Assyrians and assimilated, and Assyrians, they brought their own people in and took some out. And so the culture became muddied, and so did some of the ideology. They shared a lot in common still with their Jewish brothers and sisters, but they'd become enemies. The Jews, the southern kingdom around Jerusalem, they looked on them with disdain. And they hated each other. And so Jews would normally not walk through Samaria, journey through Samaria. They'd go the longer way around the Transjordan, the other side of the Jordan River down. But Jesus and his disciples go through. And the disciples, some of them go ahead to a Samaritan city to find a place to stay for the night. But when the Samaritans hear that he's got his face set on Jerusalem, they're not welcome. They won't welcome them anymore. And so the disciples go back and report, we're not welcome. Should we rain down fire from heaven and destroy the city? Which is a throwback to a story of Elijah, one of the great prophets, who commands fire to come down and destroys a city who was sinful and evil and resisting God and all of that. And Jesus says, no, we don't use violence. We move on. If we're not welcome, move on. Don't hate the people. Don't use violence against them. But move on to the next town, which is what he did. And the story goes on and people say, we want to follow you. But Jesus makes the point that following him is not easy. And foxes and others have holes to homes. The Son of Man has nowhere to live. It's a wandering life. It's hard. And when people want to prioritise the kinship and family responsibilities, he says, look, they're important, but sometimes there are other more important things that will draw us out. It's not going to be easy, and you're going to have to make some hard choices. When you set your mind on a direction, there are choices you make. And Jesus says, in setting your mind on following him, following in the way of love and justice and hope and peace, this reign of God which brings liberation to the world, which is about reconciliation of all things into this unity and love and oneness of God. There will be hard choices and there'll be resistance. You won't always be welcomed. People will fight you and use violence against you, but don't use violence back. Respond in love. Resist evil, but love the people. And it's a hard way, but it's a way of life for the world. And I look at myself, I hear this story and I look at myself and I wonder, what are the things I've set my face towards that then exclude other people? How do I exclude others and push them aside because of my own ideologies or faith systems or whatever it is? How do I need to change so that my way through life is not violent, is not pushing people aside, away, but drawing them into this community of love and grace, welcoming them. Now, they may not want to come in, that's fine, but they're welcome anyway. And how do I respond to those who will resist me, who will call me an idiot, a fool, whatever it is, or hate what I say because it runs counter to what they think is true or good or their ideology? Will I respond in love, forgiveness, compassion, or will I use violence against violence that only escalates? Can we follow this way of Jesus, which is to set our mind on something good, something that brings hope and life to the world, and stand strong against the resistance, strong in love and grace, of welcoming people who will be welcomed and praying for those who won't, that our world may become one and hopeful, hope-filled, peace-filled, full of love, because this is the way of God.